So, I'm Julian, and I'm coming from an aristocratic background, and I'm owner of a country estate called Hardwick Estate, which is about 5 miles west of Reading. And I was the youngest in my family, and I inherited this estate when my brother was killed in a motor racing accident when I was 16. My father died of a stroke when I was 19. And I didn't like the idea of taking on a country estate very much. I wanted to be in the arts, and I wanted to be an actor. I was interested in directing and television and things like this. But nevertheless, it came to me, this Hardwick estate. And I had to try and understand enough about life as a whole, as opposed to just about how to manage a country estate, before I felt emotionally fit to be able to take on the challenge that it presented to me. I went to Australia, I spent some time there, and when I came back I worked for 10 years with an experimental theatre company, starting in America, completing in Belgium, and involving the establishment of an organisation called the Institute for Creative Development, where we taught children how to experience drama and music and academic studies, combining them, and we saw extraordinary results. Because after all, I think we're all aware that our educational system does not teach us education. It teaches us some kind of push-down absorption of facts, which are designed to make us a slave, fundamentally, to be able to cope with the world we're going to live in and to get a job and hopefully to earn some money. So we tried to start children on a different course, the same course as I myself was hoping to walk on in order to be able to take up the challenge of my estate. I found an individual who switched me on to something called organic farming. And this was a major issue because it changed everything for me. And that was in 1975, believe it or not. I was working in Antwerp in my theatre company, and a lecturer from an organisation called the Soil Association came. And he talked about this extraordinary type of farming, where he talked about a wheel, a dynamic wheel of health, in which soil, plant, animal, and man were inextricably interconnected. And if you cut or caused a problem in any one of those cycles, the other three are bound to be affected. And I was very intrigued, because we in our theatre company were working with voice, movement, music, and text as a sort of principle of a new type of theatre. So when I heard about soil, plant, animal, and man also being a wheel of health, a creative issue, I suddenly connected the two. People often said to me, how could you go from theatre into farming? You couldn't have a more diametrically opposite set of circumstances. But I emotionally was very, very soon, very, very quickly adapting, because I had this sense of this dynamic that Eve Balfour, the director of the Soil Association, had infused in me. Soil, plant, animal, man, as a cyclic wheel of dynamic health. This work that I did then in the Soil Association involved, at least to start with, trying to find an economic solution to a system which was considered impossible to make into an economic proposition. After all, mainstream agriculture was very much in the foreground in that time. There were only 4 other registered organic farmers in England in 1975. And we soon met up, and we all helped each other to try and establish something that could also bring economic reward, not just environmental and, so to speak, physical and mental and spiritual reward. Because when you work in a system which abandons monoculture, you already get closer to working with what I call with nature. Monoculture is when you grow the same crop year after year after year after year on the same piece of land. And actually it's impossible to do that without using agrochemicals, because the pests attack those crops. They get used to them being there, the soil becomes sterile, the pests attack, and the system collapses eventually. But with the invention of herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, it was possible to destroy the pests on a temporary basis, year by year. But the interesting phenomena was that with a nitrate fertilizer, which is coming from the Second World War, excess of bombs and bullets, nitrate is the explosive factor which was involved in building the ammunition factories in the Second World War in England. It was discovered there was a huge surplus of this product. When they threw it on the ground, they were amazed to find the grass grew about 25% quicker. Crops all grew about 25% quicker. So nitrate fertilizer replaced farmyard manure. It's an absolutely critical point in the change of agriculture in the UK. Farmyard manure is a genuine fertilizer. It fertilizes the soil. The soil is a living organism, a living, breathing organism. 1 teaspoonful of soil contains over 16 million minute forms of life. Now I'm talking about a fertile teaspoonful of soil, right? Take that out of the equation and put on a synthetic chemical product, and the soil starts to die. Frank, it absolutely starts to die. You will get the plant to grow because the nitrate is soluble and it goes straight to the roots. The plant grows, but the soil doesn't get fertilized. And it's rather like, I use the analogy of Coca-Cola. You know, you take a Coke and you get, ooh, you know, the sugar factor in it makes you go, but you're very deflated at the end of the day because your adrenaline, everything's been pumped up, but your overall health has not been improved, rather the opposite. With chemicals and sugar and all these things, it's exactly like nitrate fertilizer was for the soil. So I soon discovered all these things because I had to do it the hard way. I had to learn by doing. So I started rather small. And gradually, as I became convinced that the system worked, organic farming, with its rotational system, its use of farmyard manures, many different types of animals, dunging the ground and producing more and more fertility, crops unaffected by pests. That was the most wonderful thing to discover. Unaffected by pests when you do this rotational system. Then, perhaps even more extraordinary, animals that never needed the vet. And I had 25, 30 Guernsey cows, 500 free-range hens. That's after I've been going for about 10 years. I had turkeys, chickens, I had arable crops, I had wonderful unpasteurized milk and cream. And I can tell you this, I never, ever had to ask for the vet. I was reading a magazine called Farmers Weekly at that time. And the Farmers Weekly was telling me, you can't do that. It's impossible. You know, science says you can't do that. It doesn't work. You know, you will have terrible problems if you don't have pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, and all this stuff. The animals will get sick. You'll need the vet all the time. The cows will get mastitis and all the other problems that go with it. And they showed great big pictures of what it's like when a cow gets some disease. And horrible pictures, you know, blood everywhere. And I suddenly realized, you know, that this is all somehow supported by an industry. Whereas farming's not an industry. It is not an industrial process. It's something completely different, actually. It's not even a business which should be thinking too much about money. It should be thinking about health. It should be thinking about biodiversity. It should be thinking about life principles. It should be thinking about our relationship with the land and the universe. Industry that the Farmers Weekly was telling me I must try and follow. I noted very carefully that the names of some of the more extreme pesticides all followed war names. I remember there was missile, particularly, it was a very strong, and kill, oh, and avenge, you know. Well, what a way to treat nature. What a way to treat the food which we're going to need to live on. Starting off with that type of principle, how could it possibly be nourishing? Nourishment is about body, mind and spirit, like Watkins' bookshop. It's a good place to be, to give a lecture like this. It's about nourishing on all those planes, you know. And really, unfortunately, agrochemical, industrial farming is only interested in one plane. Money. You all heard of money, haven't you? Yes, well, you know, you don't hear of anything else, really, in the end. So if it's all based on money, then what have we got to look forward to in the future? Okay, now I'm going to jump. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, because at the end of my 15, 20 years of getting the organic farming going, and it went pretty well, I had a change, and I met my wife, who's here today, Jadwiga Łopata, from Poland, and I went to support her in Poland to try and stop that country taking on genetically modified organisms. Now we're shifting onto genetically modified organisms are an advanced format of the same one I told you about monoculture. They're just a more extended concept of that very same thing. Here they're saying, oh well, follow the science. Follow the science. If you want your crops to survive, you have to genetically modify them. Because ordinary crops can't deal with the problems we're facing today. So you have to genetically modify them in order to do that. And if you genetically modify something, you change it into a not natural thing right from the beginning. At least with monoculture, you started with a seed, which was a normal seed, but then you just soused it with chemicals. This, you didn't even start with a normal seed, you started with a genetically modified organism, which is an extraordinary concept when you think about it. So this particular product was given the capacity by scientists to resist the sprays, the pesticides, the herbicides, and the nitrate, but kill everything that might get in the way of that crop's development. So imagine a field with weeds, and with wildflowers, with butterflies, birds, insects, whatever. You apply your genetically modified product made by Monsanto Corporation. I'm sure you've heard of that corporation, some of you. Monsanto Corporation. It's now part of Bayer. Bayer bought it. You souse your crop with that particular product. Everything else dies, but that plant remains. So the field is blank soil with the one thing you need, everything else killed. Not only that, it goes down into the soil organisms and it starts mutating the mycorrhizae and the plant, the animal, the subtle animal life that lives under the soil. Now you couldn't invent a more horrific form of destruction than that, I thought, until I heard about 5G. 5G is a form of microwave which is going to supplant 3 and 4G on mobile phones. So I'm going to take you out of the world of farming, because I've only got quarter for now to give rather a long talk, and I'm going to take you straight into the issue which is deeply connected, you'll see I think by the time I've finished, with GMO, with genetically modified organisms. The same principles are being applied. This time it's coming from the air as opposed to coming from the soil. 5G is currently being rolled out in this country, in Europe, and in America particularly, where it started about a year and a half ago. Very, very current, what I'm talking about now. 5G is a microwave. It's a microwave. You know microwave oven? Does anyone have one? Good. Thank God you don't. That's brilliant. I've never had an audience before and no one has a microwave oven. Maybe you do and you're keeping quiet about it. Well, I don't blame you. Anyway, you stick your hand in a microwave oven for about 30 seconds. You know, you won't come out feeling too good. But it doesn't seem to matter to the telecommunications network of today that that's what they intend to do to us. They intend to microwave us with this 5G. Now, unfortunately, 3, 4G, anyone with a mobile phone, well, it's a problem, isn't it? Because there's two types of electromagnetic systems working. There's us, we're electromagnetic, but we're working on a plane with a natural level of electromagnetic resonance called the Schumann Resonance. That operates on something around about 7.58, 7.7 Hertz, Hz. That's the natural resonance which goes around the planet. And human beings, hundreds and thousands of years ago, were perfectly adapted to that resonance. Those people living at that time were extraordinarily able to recognize things in nature which we don't recognize at all, because we desensitized ourselves because of our system you might even call neoliberal capitalism, is, you know, the rush for money, industry, building, speed, all the rest of it has desensitized us to nature. So it doesn't seem strange to many people to have a mobile phone, because we're so desensitized already, it doesn't appear to make much difference. But the reality is that the wavelengths and the emissions of these microwave phones, etc., are adapting us just like GMO adapts seeds. It's forcing us to be unnatural. If we're going to adapt to a machine, to a technology, rather than saying the technology must adapt to us, we're in deep trouble. That's why in the introduction that was given, there's a certain level of apocalyptic crisis going on at the moment. I'm optimistic, incidentally, about the future, but we are passing through an extraordinary phase where we seem to be, as a human race, I'm making a general remark now, we seem to be feeling that it is our place to adapt to the machine rather than the machine adapt to us. In other words, us adapt to what is unnatural rather than remaining natural and forcing things to support that particular approach. Now, this issue of the 5G technology is being adopted by very large corporations indeed. The Boeing Corporation, for instance, Virgin Atlantic, Elon Musk's Starlink organization. Almost all the large corporations are getting behind this and are forcing it on us. We, Jadwiga and I, have been working in Poland and in England on trying to warn local authorities, and believe me, lots of other campaigners are too. Look, we might have a problem here. Wouldn't it be a good idea to check the safety factors involved in this, the health and safety factors? The precautionary principle, is it being respected in this case? Are citizens being asked, what do you feel about this? Do we have any say whatsoever in what's happening on this planet? And the local authorities say, well, I'm sorry, we have no authority to take a position. So you say to them, what? You have no authority to take a position? I mean, we're living in your community. Our health is, we're very concerned. There are 10,000 peer-reviewed scientific papers saying this is extremely dangerous. 10,000 peer-reviewed papers. Oh, well, you know, but, sorry. So then you go to a government official. You say a government official responsible for environment and telecommunications. Same question. Oh, sorry, it's outside our field of expertise. Outside our field of expertise. I'm sorry about that. There's really very little we can do. We'll certainly listen to you. We'll take note of your concerns. But, sorry. So who then do you turn to? Well, you turn to other people who feel concerned, and rightly so, of course, and who feel responsible for their families, their grandchildren, their children, their immediate environment, all the rest of it. And you say, look, we need to work together because they're not listening to me as a single individual. But maybe if enough people come together and get behind this thing, we'll force this out into the open. So we are now working with groups of people, and there are a number of groups of people in England. In the West Country, there's already been 7 local authorities that have used the precautionary principle or a moratorium to at least hold the thing up until some more research is revealed. But it's not enough. And I think what's going to happen is it'll be the case of taking individuals who refuse to accept responsibility, but who are in positions of responsibility, into the courts. Why should we be passively accepting our own destruction? And let me tell you this, the evidence is very strong for what has happened to insect life under these conditions, bird life under these conditions, trees under these conditions. Already in Sheffield, I'll give you an example of something quite appalling which is going on. They're cutting down the trees in Sheffield so that the 5G signal can pass unrestricted to house to house to house. They're removing the trees to make that possible because they discovered that leaves, especially when they're wet, block the signal. And the signal on 5G is millimeter wave length. On an ordinary mobile phone like yours, it's not millimeter, it's slightly longer. When you get down to millimeter, it's like bit, 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 bit like machine gun. They have to, and it's rather short distances it can only go. So the theory is, and that's what the telecommunications companies say, we will need one of these masts or transmitters every 10 houses in every town in Europe. Every 10 houses. You walk out of your house and you're immediately being blasted by this microwave, millimeter wavelength. Now this is very shocking. I'm not here to shock you, I'm here to tell you the truth. And I'm a great believer in trying to tell the truth. In every specific detail, I might not be 100% accurate, but I'm trying to convey something bigger than purely technical details. I'm trying to convey the fact that we humans, in order to retain our humanity, have to overcome this robotic mind. Because what goes on beyond 5G? Well, there is something called the Singularity Principle being worked on in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is responsible for a lot of this stuff, incidentally. And that is called Singularity, and it's about man and computer being merged. Ray Kurzweil is the leading voice in it. If anyone wants to do any research on this, just look up Ray Kurzweil, Singularity, and you will find out what you need to find out. Now, you would have thought this was fantasy not very long ago. And I did. You know, 20 years ago I knew about this, but I thought, well, it's fantasy, really. But no, it isn't, unfortunately. This is huge amounts of money and investment are going into this idea. This idea is that human beings are not capable of the highest form of intelligence. They're not capable of being able to have a supreme knowledge, but the computer is. The computer is. I remember reading about a computer that defeated Kasparov, a famous Russian chess player once, and he said this is a very bad day for humanity. And I thought, what does he mean by that? Well, I understand what he means by it now. If the vision of the future of all of us has been reduced, that's the word, to nothing more than a monoculture, and it is a monoculture, where knowledge and intelligence and mechanistic ability is the goal and not the divine, we have lost our planet and we've lost our sanity. And we are approaching such a time unless we do something about it. I believe that when I talk about doing something about it, this is a question of going inwards and going outwards. It's both. I meditate and I'm an activist. And some people say, oh, that's a bit strange, isn't it? You know, I mean, meditation, you go in and you calm yourself and you go deeply in and you try and avoid being involved in any sort of activities that might produce friction or resentment or anything in the outer world which is causing all these problems. You go into your own world and you become a more pure being, and then maybe you can go out into the world and help purify others. And activists say, oh no, forget the spiritual thing. You go out there, man, and we'll get together and we'll close down the American embassy there, and we'll do this, that, and the other there, and we'll fight to stop that particular coal-fired power station being built, and we'll stop that nuclear power, so on. That's activism and that's spiritualism, but they haven't been put together. They're seen as separate things, and that's a tragedy, frankly, because they're not. Everything exists going in and going out. Breath is the prime example. You breathe in and you breathe out. And everything in the world works that way. Even electricity itself is based on negative and positive interaction constantly. If you didn't have both working simultaneously, you wouldn't have the propagation of life on this planet. Sexuality is based on male and female, not you guys, incidentally. A term I hate because it reduces men and women to nothing more than either just men. You guys. Hey, you guys. Sorry, any Americans who are here, and never mind. You know, I was an actor once, so sometimes I get into a bit of that stuff. But basically what I'm trying to say is that men and women reproduce, right? So the way reproduction works on the cosmic level is exactly the same. It's the friction between two different forces which created life on this universe. And anyone that says it isn't hasn't really gone into themselves deep enough to feel what I'm talking about. So we're coming up 4 minutes more to go before we start questions and answers. So I'm going to try and paint the idea of what possibly could be the outer resolution. The inner resolution is undoubtedly to follow spiritual practice, to meditate, to do yoga, to do anything that makes the true I emerge, as opposed to the false chatterbox I that's always telling us what we should be doing. The fake I, frankly. The real I is deeply, deeply connected to the source, to the divine, to the cosmos. We are cosmic beings. There's no doubt about it. How could we not be, after all? But on the outer action level, more difficult in a certain sense, because that demands courage, determination, passion. Without those qualities, we're not going to succeed on the outer level. And the determination is the sort of determination which refuses to give in. You would die for what you believe in the sort of outward activism I'm describing. You would die for it, because what's the point in living if everything that's strong, natural and beautiful in you is restricted into a box and you pretend that you're living your life? I'll give you one short example of how this type of outward work can work. Jadwiga and I, in Poland, in 2000 to 2004, 5, 6, managed to prevent that country getting GMOs introduced into it by very large corporations. And just two of us, almost alone, did it. We had colleagues who helped, but we led this campaign. And this is not a boast, this is simply telling you what happened. We were as amazed, believe me, as anyone would be hearing the story. Just the two of us. And it's worked like this. We came to the conclusion that you can't get anywhere by only going to central government and trying to get something done. It's a closed shop. So you start with local authorities. This is in around 2001, 2002. Because local authorities still have some pride in their region. You know, like in a county in England, a county council or district council, they still have people there, have some pride in their county. So we said to them, look, if you accept these genetically modified organisms, your wonderful reputation for this wonderful Polish farmhouse foods that you have all over the world is going to be destroyed, because this is going to destroy all the small farmers, this type of genetically modified organism. And if you want to encourage biodiversity and the beauty of your already beautiful countryside, you want to go the opposite way. You want to go towards something more natural, some more organic, which is the sort of language we use with these people. And we discovered enough human beings were there to take this quite seriously. And through a colleague of Jadwiga's, who became a senator very soon after we met him, in one of the provinces of Poland on the east side, on the Russian border, we suggested to them that they set up what we called a Gmo Free Zone, a genetically modified organism free zone. And we said, if you can establish that symbolically, that'll be a very powerful tool to start with. And we will support you in this. And believe it or not, they did. So then we said to those people, look, come to Krakow. We'd like to get Małopolska also into a GMO-free zone. So they came and gave a talk about why they did it in that other province. And the people in Małopolska and in Krakow were impressed. And they said, yes, we will sign up to this. And then we got a third one, and it started rolling. You wouldn't really believe it, but in 1.5 years, the whole of Poland had signed up to be genetically modified free zone. Every single chairman of every single board was instructed by us to write to the Prime Minister and say, we demand real legislation, because all we've done is do a symbolic act. We demand that you ban the import and planting of GMO. And he did, 3 or 4 months later. He did. He banned it. Poland was the first country in Europe to ban genetically modified organisms. Now, why can't we do the same with 5G? If we can do it with GMO, we can do it with 5G. And this time, not just 2 people, thousands of people, frankly, who are feeling already intuitively nervous because the state we're all in, and the state of the planet, and the state of corruption in government, and the state of, fake news in the mainstream press, and all this stuff. We know it's happening, even if we don't admit it readily to our colleagues. We know it's finished as a democracy. We have to reinvent democracy, totally reinvent it from the ground up, in a beautiful way, more like soil, plant, animal, and man, the wheel, the dynamic wheel of health. If we start with some symbols like that, there's hope for the new democracy. There's hope for people, ordinary people, and extraordinary people. All ordinary people are extraordinary people, actually. It's just that many have never been given the chance to express themselves in this crazy life. So, on that level, I'm going to conclude the first part of my talk, and thank you very much. I suggest something called the Global Appeal to Stop 5G. Yes, we can write Global Appeal to Stop 5G on Earth and in space, because I didn't tell you this, and that's why Richard Branson comes in. They want to launch 60,000 satellites in the next 2 years, all 5G, to cover the entire planet. Zap us all, basically. So we cannot go anywhere without being fed 5G. They've already launched about Elon Musk, Starlink, and Richard Branson's providing some of the power for the rockets. He's already launched about 3,000. But this is just the very beginning. I really wanted almost not to speak about this because it seems like overwhelming. But we will find a way if we work with the divine forces, or find a way of stopping these satellites. Yes, next one.
Is there any big protest group at the moment?
Protests, yes, there are some very big protests. Yes, quite, good question. No, there are. I'm glad to say the momentum on the protest side is rapidly growing. There have been some very big protests, even very recently, about a week ago, actually on the 25th of last month, January, there was a global protest movement, and there were hundreds, thousands of people out on the street in places like Holland, I remember here, in Germany, huge number in Germany. Doctors in Germany have been warning about this for the last 20 years, and no one's been listening to them, because doctors are seeing people coming constantly to them with symptoms of electromagnetic problems associated with that. Those sort of symptoms are very extensive, but a lot of them to do with problems with the brain, because it goes straight through the vibrations goes through the brain to start with, but it works its way down. If anyone wants to see a very good person, English expert, describe this, Barry Trower, his B-A-R-R-I-E, Trower, T-R-O-W-E-R. If you want to go onto YouTube or anyone, put his name in, you will find him describing the composition and the dangers associated with 2G, 3G, 4G and 5G very accurately, because he worked with the British Royal Navy at a time when this was being developed as a military weapon. But the main place where it was being developed as a military weapon was America. It was actually designed as a weapon, 5G, just as I told you about agriculture. Remember I said nitrates and pesticides? Pesticides in agriculture come from nerve gas. They're from nerve gases. There were a lot of nerve gases left after the war. They weren't used that extensively, thank God. So they found a way of turning them into ways of destroying bugs instead. So you've got the same situation with 5G, basically. So I do recommend Barry Trower, do go to that one. You will find a very, very good advice on how it all ties together. This gentleman is pointing out, I'm saying this for the camera because he probably couldn't pick up your question. He's interested in why fluoride and all these different things are being put into the water supply, etc. And for instance, into the food, all these colorings, preservatives and all the rest of it. So it goes on. He's asking, could this be associated with the desire for population reduction? Well, the answer is, yes, it could. But when you get onto the scale of what we're talking about now, genetically modified organisms and 5G and all the rest of it, you have to really ask yourself the question, are these people who are pushing this sort of thing forward truly human beings? You know, do they feel compassion? Do they understand anything about, you know, love, beauty, joy, peace? Right? Why are they forcing humanity onto the, you know, back against the wall? But I do know one thing about that is the very famous expression which is power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And people who get into these top positions today, whether it's in industry or in parliament or in politics, they seem to find it addictive, and they will do almost anything to retain their position and to be seen to be sort of heroic figures without having the first idea it is what they're actually doing. Permaculture is a very interesting system which works strongly with nature, and is many young people today are getting involved with that form of agriculture. Read my book. The answer's there. It's not the answer, but I try to answer this question because that is the key. And in fact, the convenience factor is very, very, very subtle form of destruction for the human state, because, you know, it seems so convenient, and the more convenient it seems, the less and less we do. We don't think, we actually have done a sort of philosophy that to do as little as possible is a sort of freedom. How could we ever have arrived at such an extraordinary idea? You know, to sit and stew on a couch with every conceivable type of gizmo available to you, and your food delivered to your door, and someone walking your dog for you. Is that really freedom? Not in my book. But the answer, I think, just in very short, is only people who are willing to wake a little bit up and take in something different from what they're accustomed to can start down the new route. If there is no willingness, there is no possibility. They've got to be open to the idea. And then positive information can be fed, and we can start moving. Otherwise we're static. I did say in the advertisement of Watkins Bookshop that I would say, but of course I actually didn't quite realise that I didn't quite have enough time to do this. I was going to explain to you why the global warming thing is a complete hoax. But look, maybe on another occasion. It's a big subject, but it is a hoax, and something to think about. You can read some of my essays on my website, which I explore that. Julian, www.julianrose at info.pl. No, .info. www.julianrose.info. And I have some essays on that subject.